Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Yak Meet. Today, we're with Nita Baum of Be Free. She founded this organization. Nita, I was wondering if you could share a little bit about what Be Free does and how you see yourself in relation to it.
Yeah, and just I'll start by saying thank you so much for this conversation. I think conversations are part of how we co-create the world we'd like to live in. So I'm so appreciative to be in dialogue with you. Yeah, so I am the founder of Be Free, and at a sort of macro level, our vision is to recreate the workplace as healing space. What we mean by that is it's a place where you can experience well-being, your own sustainability, and your own liberation or freedom at, through, and because of work, not in spite of it. And the you in that you is all people. We take a holistic approach. We view individuals as this kind of ecosystem of mind, body, spirit at work. And integral to our approach is an equitable and inclusive orientation. When we say all people, we mean all people, irrespective of the way you identify or the way others may identify you.
And when you think about that in practice, for many, I imagine there's a shift from just participating in an economy, and work is just an expression of that participation. You know, I need money to live, what have you. How do people navigate that shift with the work that you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one is, and I'll come at that from different angles, sort of like prism-like responses. So one perspective on that is when I engage with you as a consultant, right, the roles that we're playing in that moment are I'm a consultant and you're a client. At the same time, if I sort of drop that conception and broaden into just a perception, into the perceived, right, what is my perception of what's happening here? You're a person and I'm a person, and we're in a shared space of community together. So the inquiry that we're in it's a people and a purpose-driven inquiry, really. Like, what are we doing here together and in service of what? And I would say so much of the genesis of our work is about being in that rooted inquiry. Like, the purpose of work, in my mind, is to ultimately contribute to the well-being of the people who are doing it. And the purpose, and there's a conversation there about also where we're doing it. We're doing it on this planet, right? And it's about envisioning the planet as a place that we're also contributing to, as a place that's contributing to us. So it's about this sort of like feedback loop. And the one point I'll make there from a sort of concrete perspective is like the term, and language is such a big part of how we make sense and meaning of our experience in the workplace. So the term human resources, which I appreciate its genesis and its intention. And I would like to posit the alternative of just like person or people, right? Or human, and drop the resources, because there's an implication there, which arguably is rooted in our history, right? And this goes to constructs of race and all of the ways in which we reduce our humanity, all the isms and all of the biases that ultimately contribute to the ways we reduce each other. And the notion that, like, are you a resource to be consumed? Or actually, like, are you the actual person in service of whom we are doing what we do? And that, again, that may sound sort of like an abstract shift, but when you start using your purpose as the foundation and the basis from which you create the conditions, the structures, the way people are interacting, relating, and communicating in the workplace, irrespective of what you do, can be any industry doing any kind of work. But if the focus is about the way you're relating and that it's a human to a human relationship, that absolutely ultimately informs and shapes the way you enact your products, your services, your systems, your policies, your programs, your procedures. And one more thing I'll say there is, so we take this kind of integral view of the organization and its context. And by that, I mean, like, what people frequently want to do when they're seeking to change culture, and especially on, for example, diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, is like, let's start at the end. Let's change the system. Let's change the product. Let's change the way we're messaging this externally to the external environment. And a lot of my response to that is, are you embodying what you espouse, right? And if you're starting at the end, but you're actually not living into it, then there's a gap. And we need both. But I would say culturally, in the United States specifically, and this very much, we're very much a place-based organization when it comes to race, for example, although we do work globally on culture. But from a place-based perspective, like the systems piece is sitting inside of this broader perspective that also informs and shapes it, right? And it's like the desire to be responsive is awesome, but if you're not actually living that, you're going to have this gap. So how do we close that gap? It's at that nexus that our work lies.
Mm. It really impacted me to hear you describe the change in like verbiage from human resources management of consumption, shifting from that language to serving as the verb, hearing how that kind of changes just the way that you approach the work. The other thing that you said that really kind of connected for me was embodying what you espouse, because culture change, we have this like gap, like problem all the time. And like, I remember from my own experiences, like culture change was just this thing where you was like, we're just going to become that. And in the process of doing that, you devalue the culture that you already have. And there's so much that just like comes to the surface there. And ultimately, I think a lot of organizations fail that test. Are you embodying what you espouse? That really was impactful to hear you say that. But I'm wondering how we got here. Like I know you have a background in education. I know there are lots of interesting milestones along the way. What's the story of Nita? How did you get to this point?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. It's nice to have a space to reflect and pause for a moment in the midst of as I was sharing with you before this, like a back-to-back day. And that alone is like a practice that we work with the organizations we work with on. It's like, how do you pause and create intentional time for reflection that actually allows you to see who you were and update your legacy impression of yourself to be reflective of this moment in service of the future and in service of this moment. So thank you for giving me that space today. I think I'll go back to childhood because there's something about that feels sort of like alive and present. I'm the daughter of a pair of East Indian immigrants, and I was first generation. And I think the experience I had of my household was this orientation toward the community. It was like, it occurred to me later in life, I was like, oh, I come from a tribal culture, like a culture that's really conscious of our interdependence and the fact that we need one another. And by default, we're social beings, right? Whatever our beliefs or views may be, like we actually do coexist, period. And so that played out in my household in different ways, like, like organize yourself. So it's like in the kitchen, like stack the plates here and like put the rice there and put the other things there. Always put things back in their place, not just because it was aesthetically pleasing or more beautiful and like nice for my mom, but actually because there's this tribal orientation. It's like, if I'm not there and somebody needs something, or they need to find where the plate is, it's always in the same place. It's always like visible to them. So this like consciousness of the other, and the other being very much like yourself. My American experience of like navigating school and playing tennis and kind of, hanging out with my American friends and going to school where self-development and your individuality and your freedom was really valued, was also really impactful. So it was just like I went to this really awesome school that was actually from 3rd to 5th grade. It was like one of the first talented and gifted programs in New York City. And I took a bus to get to it. So I left my home, area, which unto itself is telling about the American school system, right? To go to this better school. All the students in the school were Black, but for 2 of us. It was one of the wealthiest Black neighborhoods in the country, Cambria Heights in Queens, New York. And so I had this very particular experience of being in an environment that celebrated and exalted Black culture, which was very formative for me around education and around equity. And Mensa came to teach us, and we learned to meditate, and we did all this really cool stuff. But one of the things I remember in addition to that about the school was it was very project-based learning. So at the beginning of the year in 3rd grade, I was there from 3rd to 5th grade. So I was like 8 years old. They were like, read 20 books and do 20 book reports, and we'll see you at the end of the year. By the way, they're, you know, today's September 5th or whatever, and they're due on June 20th, and make sure you get them in. And that's it. So you're creating your whole pathway, right, with this like open landscape of like, okay, 20 books, 20 book reports, like by myself. And to an 8-year-old, that's kind of a big deal, you know? So it was really interesting cultivation of like my own individuality. I was like, wow, I got to figure out how to schedule this. I got to figure out what books I want to read. Do I talk to people about this? Do I like network? Do I do it by myself? And so, you know, having that experience of appreciating the power of freedom and of autonomy and the development, the ways in which it contributes to your development and your growth. And then fast forward, recognizing that it's not either or, but it's including and transcending, right? And so in the workplace, this notion, I think one of the most fundamental and challenging notions inside of the workplace is, and in the school system in many ways, is it's either the individual or the collective. It's either the individual or the team. And part of what we say about the workplace is comprised of individuals. So what happens if you look at and cultivate the creations for the mutual thriving and the mutual reinforcement and iteration of individual and interdependent collective, and you build from that space, right? So yeah, I would say I skipped over a lot, but that's some of some of how I got here.
I love it's not the either or the or, it's actually both, and kind of how they relate together, not just the individual, not just the collective. That's amazing. Just to sort of close this out, right now, I mean, we're recording this on June 18th, 2020, and there's a lot going on, and a lot that I think might be causing fear for many of us or concern. But let's focus on the hope for a moment. What's giving you hope right now?
Yeah, that's awesome. So I think a lot about this concept of the collective nervous system, and we draw on neuroscience in our work, and specifically neurophysiology. And one specific thing I'll share about that always strikes me is we make sense of the world through our bodies first, and our cognitive mind as we conceive of it, most of us second. So I have an experience, there's a stimulus that comes in, my body's registering it and is seeking cues, visually, facial expressions, and other ways that we sense. And then I'm sending information from my viscera, my various organs, to what we think of as the brain, which we usually think is up here, but there's actually a massive one in our stomach, right? More neural pathway, more nerves there than in the brain. Yeah. And we're sending that information, and then we're making sense and meaning through that next step. But the first place we make it is through our body. So that to me is really interesting in a moment where we're talking about part of the experience we're having are like collective movements we're having. You know, we're in the context of COVID, this very visceral experience we're having, right? So how are we making sense and meaning of our collective experience? The notion of collective nervous system, super simply, is you have a nervous system, I have a nervous system. And the way I'm regulating mine and the way I'm sensing and experiencing mine has an impact on yours, and vice versa. And if you think about co-regulation as co-evolution, like collectively, we're in this moment, right, where we're super impacting each other in a myriad of ways, and it's complex. So my hopes and my fears are actually, I would summarize into almost one statement, which is like how we unbecome something we don't want to be is how we become the thing we do.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, and thanks for being here with me today. I'm excited for more people to get to know you.
Oh, likewise. Thank you so much, Ben. I thank you for your beautiful inquiries and for holding the space and for being in community with me.